it.
Got him.
No, they didn't. Oh, my gracious.
Yep.
How about that?
With the second pick in the 2011 NFL Draft, the Denver Broncos select Von Miller, linebacker, Texas A&M.
He's the greatest ever, huh?
And then I just wanted
When you got all the advantages, it's easy.
Welcome to the Aggie War Pod, a product of the Republic of Football, Dave Campbell's Texas Football Podcast Network. I am your co-host, Mike Craven, senior writer at DCTF. The other voice you'll hear on this podcast is a barbecue-eating machine who won't shy away from a road trip or an off-key rendition of Creed. The former fighting Texas Aggie defensive lineman arrived in College Station as a three-star prospect back in 2013. He now resides in Houston, but his heart never left. Ladies, gentlemen, reveille, I present the one, the only, Jay Arnold.
Yep, and after 2 weeks on the road for those road trips that you mentioned, it was nice to stay at home and watch a game on Saturday. But yeah, I think I needed to shy away from a road trip for once.
When you do karaoke, what is the Jay Arnold go-to karaoke song as somebody who enjoys singing in the way that you do?
I haven't done a ton of karaoke.
That surprises me.
The two times that I've done it, I have done I'll Make a Man Out of You from the Disney movie Mulan. There's a certain, part in that song where you go into a whole bunch of different voices that I really enjoy doing. And it's been a hit with crowds every time I've done it. So I guess that would make it my go-to song. So that's the only one I've done.
It won't surprise you to know I have never done karaoke in my life. I don't know. I don't know what the price point would be to get me in front of an audience to sing. But back when I drank a lot of alcohol and did some other things, it never got me up there. So I'd imagine as a sober man, it will never happen. I will die. Probably without ever doing karaoke. Maybe that's something I'll do when I'm like 83 and on my deathbed or something.
They have like the private rooms that you can always do one in where you don't have to get up in front of like a whole bunch of crowd and it's just like you and your friends. That may be more amenable. My first karaoke experience was actually because of a lost bet, so that's why I ended up doing it.
That's how I would get up there, is if I ever lost a bet or something like that, because you got to pay up, but I wouldn't enjoy it at all. Thank you for listening to the Aggie War Pod. Before we get going, please rate 5-star. If you're listening right now, push pause, go to the the main page that you're listening to, rate it 5-star, subscribe, link, all that kind of stuff. Please also help out our sponsors, homefieldapparel.com. Promo code WHOOP, WHOOP, will get you, there it is, will get you 15% off of your first order. And Aggie fans, they have some bomber jackets that you should go check out right now. Really cool. With the weather getting the way that the weather is, at least this week, you could use a bomber jacket or something maybe heavier. Jay Arnold's probably outside in a tank top and shorts, but the rest of us are bundled up behind this 40-something degree cold front, because we're not allowed to have fall, Jay. It's summer or it's winter. We're not allowed to have fall or spring. So anytime it's 70, go enjoy that, because we get like 7 of those days.
Yeah. Yep. You get like 2 patio days a year, and that's about it. And you're lucky if those aren't rainy patio days. So
that's right. I've pretty much given up golf because the weather has just made it impossible. We split this up into 4 downs, kind of like a football drive. In first down, we will talk about Texas A&M's 30-17 win over South Carolina on Saturday. And second down, we will preview the upcoming Week 10. Can you believe it? Week 10 road game against Ole Miss here. Coming up on this Saturday. And third down, we'll talk a little bit of recruiting. The Aggies, first bad news in a long time, right? Anytime we talk about recruiting in the Aggies, it's always positive and how well they're doing on the recruiting front. They've lost 2 big-time commitments. I'll talk to Jay Arnold, somebody who's been through the recruiting process, who's been in A&M, kind of what the importance is of that momentum and how hard it is to be a commitment these days and hold that with everybody in your ear. And then fourth down, we'll get a little bit off topic. Have some fun. We'll talk a little bit about the Love You Blue uniform controversy between the NFL, the Tennessee Titans, the Adams family, and the Cougars there. And then also the college football playoff first announcement of the top 4, however we want to say that, is coming out on Halloween. So we'll talk a little bit about what ours will look like, what we think theirs is going to look like, and talk a little bit more about the playoff. Jay, first down here, Texas A&M 30, South Carolina 17 on Saturday in Kyle Field. The Aggies now 5-3 overall, break a 2-game losing streak, 3-2 in SEC play. The Aggies now 4-1 at home in 2023. Aggies kind of slogged through the first 20 minutes of this game, didn't score till about 9 minutes left of the second quarter when Reuben Owens found the end zone on a 14-yard run. Anais Smith and a run by Amari Daniels increased that lead. What are your kind of thoughts? Or let's talk about the first half. What were your thoughts early on the Aggies' performance? Because we have a lot to talk about when it comes to the second half.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, this was just kind of a boring game, if I'm being honest, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, right? But as far as the performance, I mean, it's the same issues with the offensive line that still kind of reared their head and limited, I think, the offensive performance as far as struggling to get things in hand. And then, as the first half went on, they started to kind of make some plays and create some opportunities. Obviously, having Anais Smith back this year, we talked about it all the way into the season about how much of a problem he was for opposing defenses, and I think he really showed that. It was nice to see Reuben Owens get involved and get a touchdown there. And I just I don't know. I haven't looked at the injury report, so I don't know if he's on it, but it seems weird not seeing Le'Veon Moss after the success that he had against Arkansas. I don't know if it's a game plan thing or if he's just banged up and needed a break here, because we really haven't seen him against Tennessee or South Carolina. But as far as offensively, there were times that I was actually kind of satisfied with the run blocking. It wasn't consistent, but there were at least bright spots at some points where they opened holes. And it seemed like, A&M going for it on fourth down a couple times and getting it was kind of a nice thing to see. Obviously, those fourth and short situations has been something that A&M struggled with. So executing and getting those conversions was a positive. But
can I say something on that?
Sure. South Carolina, I'm assuming is part of the equation there, but go ahead.
I guess that's my point. If it's a smart decision against South Carolina, it's a smart decision against Alabama. It's a smart decision against the Dallas Cowboys. It's a smart decision against Rockwall Heath. Numbers, the statistics, and your decision-making shouldn't change based on the opponents. And if it does, it should lean towards aggression when against a team like Alabama, one drive or one extra series can help you. Against South Carolina, it just seems, I don't know. It just seems like such a cop-out. It makes me more mad to see them do it against South Carolina, because then it's it's not just against your whole being. You just decided to not do it against Alabama, and to me, that feels like turtling a little bit.
I hear you, but on the flip side of that, I think that obviously Alabama has a stronger front seven than South Carolina, so maybe if you have more confidence in your offensive line getting a push, it makes more sense to go from that standpoint. And again, that's why I'm not reading into that too much, is because I think they're going to get more push against the South Carolina than they would against Alabama.
That's fair. I did see when I got onto PFF today to kind of just look at stuff across the state. Anais Smith was the number 1 rated offensive player for Texas A&M there. Number 2, Layden Robinson. Texas A&M's right guard played a heck of a game. I looked at it. They had 37 rushing attempts for 123 yards, 6 for 52 when they ran between center and right guard, 4 for 1 when they ran between center and left guard. That's probably not good. Trey Zune had a pretty solid day. He was 70.7 on PFF out there on the outside. Bryce Foster had one of his best games on the day. So it did feel like the offensive line played better. I mean, I don't know if anybody's going to say they played great, especially in that first quarter. Didn't play that great, but when they got going, I don't think it's a coincidence that they started moving people around and all of a sudden they scored 21 points in the second quarter. Let's talk about the second half. 3 field goals in the second half, not a touchdown for Texas A&M. That's 3 straight weeks of no touchdowns in the second half for the Aggies. Execution, scheme, adjustments. What say you, Jay Arnold?
I do think they had one touchdown that didn't count. The ball to Max Wright in the end zone. It looked to me like he got his foot down. But maybe that's just bias coming out again.
Those maroon glasses.
Yeah, the maroon tinted glasses. But I will say, I mean, you have to execute in the second half, and you have to get touchdowns. Field goals aren't going to win games the rest of the year, especially going against teams like Ole Miss and LSU still on the schedule offensively. You know what those teams can do. Settling for field goals in the second half and having no touchdowns. I don't care how good your defense is. It's just not going to work against that level of competition. But on the same side, like it did feel like they were moving the ball and controlling the. It never felt like the contest was in doubt. In the second half, it just kind of felt like A&M was just kind of constricting South Carolina, and I think we saw that with the plethora of intentional groundings that Spencer Rattler had as well, which in my mind are basically sacks for the defense. It's frustrating because it goes back to what we've talked about, just not being able to really make the adjustments in the second half, or letting other teams catch up. And offensively, again, like I think some of it is A&M was kind of taking their foot off the gas, but you can really put a team away as opposed to letting them kind of hang around, because there's a couple drops that South Carolina had where they could be right back in that game. So that was a little bit frustrating, but again, I think it just comes down to not making adjustments while the opponents are adjusting. Luckily the defense did well enough that the lack of adjustments offensively didn't come back to haunt them, but it's still worrisome considering what you have left on the schedule.
Field goals get you beat. I want to make a shirt that says field goals or punts, because it's basically the same thing, right? Like Texas A&M is 111th in touchdown conversion percentage in the red zone, at 51.35. And so what I'd like to ask you is, what makes a good red zone offense?
It's tough, right? Because a red zone offense, you're forced to kind of constrict everything. Everything is there's less room to work with, and sometimes that can be a little bit more difficult. I think being able to really generate push in the run game is a big part of having a successful red zone offense. Another flip side of that is having all receiving options, which theoretically A&M should be good with. Guys like Jake Johnson at tight end position, and then Noah Thomas, who obviously has a chance to get a touchdown, gets a little banged up there, but those kind of matchup issues for an opposing defense should theoretically give you an edge offensively. So if it's a scheme thing where you're not trying to focus on getting the ball to those types of weapons in the red zone, and that's part of the issue. It's tough. I mean, I know from the run game standpoint, it's not generating enough push. That one's the easy one to address.
Right.
From a passing standpoint, it's weird to me because I feel like with the mix of the athleticism, with a guy like Evan Stewart, who's not tall but can go up and get a ball, a quickness with a guy like Anai Smith, where he can break off a route really quickly and should be able to create just enough space to get open. Plus the taller athletes that I mentioned, and Jake Johnson and Noah Thomas, it feels like A&M should not have a problem creating those opportunities for passing touchdowns in the red zone. So I'm not sure exactly what the issue is. Again, I'm not a genius offensively, or really in any way by any standard, but it just seems like that A&M should be able to accomplish something with the weapons they have.
Just from listening to coaches over the years, it always feels like they talk about needing to be able to run the ball when the other team knows you're going to run it. And to your point, A&M's not getting enough push doing that. And then the other part of that equation is having a quarterback that can make a play. That when it gets condensed, it's probably not going to be there like the way that it is on the 30-yard line. It won't feel open in a way it normally does at the college level. Like there's usually a guy pretty open in college football compared to what the NFL looks like and stuff. And you need a quarterback to go get that. When it's inside the 10 or inside the 20, that gets condensed and those windows are smaller, and maybe you need to get off script and go make a play. And to me, that feels like the biggest drop off between Connor Wegman and Max Johnson. Just that needing to take a sidestep out of the pocket, create a play, and go do something that's not on the piece of paper, or make that really intense, like into the window throw, or make that decision a little bit quicker and get the ball out before it closes. Max Johnson had an 80.4 rating when the pocket was clean, a 43.5 rating when he was under pressure. And so inside the red zone, it feels like it's easier to dial up pressure because you don't have to worry about guys over the back end. You're not scared of Anais Smith or Evan Stewart getting behind you. And so to me, that feels like A&M's kind of bugaboo right now down there is they're not able to just run the football and pound people, but then they also don't have that guy at quarterback. And I think Max Johnson's a solid quarterback. I think his limitations pop up in the red zone when it's like, hey, dude, go make a play. And I'm just not sure he's like the guy to just go make a play. It has to be there. It has to be there the way it was drawn up on Tuesday for him to make a play on Saturday.
Yeah, and there are times where he'll get out of the pocket and run, but he's not a stellar runner by any means, and he's not as good at the improvisation part. Like you said with Wegman, I think Wegman just kind of maybe has a little bit more feel for when to break out of the pocket and when to get rid of the ball. And we've talked about that with dealing with pressure too, and maybe Wegman, part of the reason he won the job was because he's a little bit better at feeling pressure and getting rid of the ball before he takes a sack.
He's got that chaos in him.
Yeah, a little bit of that chaos. And, like obviously playing against or playing with a guy during my career that was just a master of that kind of, red zone chaos theory where, I just remember the game against, I think it was Ole Miss on the road in Oxford where he makes a play. Talking about Johnny, obviously, for those not in the know. And
you're in the wrong podcast if you didn't understand what was being talked about there.
But just some of the things that those elite playmakers at quarterback can do, and Max isn't able to maybe create some of those opportunities. And again, this isn't saying that Max is bad because I think he is a much better backup quarterback than a lot of teams have.
Yeah. I think he could start at 4 or 5 SEC schools. Like he's a good player. I just think it gets the decisions have to be faster. The windows get tighter. And if you're a B level quarterback or a B plus level quarterback, you can see that in the red zone more than you can on the 50.
Yeah, 100%. And that goes to what you're saying is, and also I think part of it is not wanting to make mistakes, right? Like having a little bit of hesitation on the windows that are a little bit tighter there in the red zone, like you talked about.
Defensively, another big game for Texas A&M. Keep getting after the passer. Front seven looks excellent. Secondary played really well. You're a defensive guy. Kind of what did you take from the game other than Edgerrin Cooper is maybe the best defensive player in the freaking country? The dude is a baller.
How many times did you watch that play on that screen where he defeated 3 blockers to make a play?
I watched it 3 times before we started just the show.
Yeah, I watched that clip so many times. But yeah, man, this defense is just it's still a very, very impressive unit in the front seven. Obviously, Edgerrin Cooper has been a revelation. But I think the secondary has improved as well over the course of the season. I think that's been something that's that's been kind of interesting to watch. One of the guys that was a transfer that I don't think we have seen too much of this year in the secondary, and Sam McCall. We saw his name called a couple times, so that could be an interesting development. And obviously, I think they were trying to rotate the corners a little bit more, just keep fresh legs out there with a defense or with an offense in South Carolina that can run. But I think that's probably one of my bigger takeaways is just. They got help from South Carolina. There were some drops, like we talked about, but holding this South Carolina passing attack to under 200 yards, I think was a really strong performance. And then obviously the front seven doing what they do, 33 yards rushing for South Carolina. Another really, really stellar performance against the run. So that's encouraging just because anytime you can slow down a team like that, it's a big win for you.
We'll talk a little bit more about this in a second, but think about this run defense right now compared to what you thought about it going into the Ole Miss game last year. That'll tell you all you need to know about the DJ Durkin turnaround. Not coincidentally, the week that we just absolutely obliterated that defense on this podcast, and I wrote Aggies have a DJ Durkin problem, and then all of a sudden the defense has become the 85 Bears. They're second in the nation in sacks and sacks per game. They're averaging 4.13 sacks a game. The only team better than that is James Madison, and they play in the Sun Belt. So Wrecking Crew, absolutely back. Edgerrin Cooper, best defensive player in the state. I think I can already just lock that All Texas defensive player of the year statue up there. We need to get a statue. There's not a statue, but there needs to become a statue. Just absolutely. And to your point in the secondary, I wrote this another. I like the thing I enjoy most about PFF, and we could get into this debate in the offseason about the usefulness of PFF. The thing I like about it most is snap counts. You can get an idea of who's. I'm not going to sit there. I got 13 FBS schools to cover. I can't count how many guys are playing in the secondary, but it goes beyond, because you just look at the starting lineups, and sometimes that doesn't give you an illustration of who's actually on the field. Here are their secondary stat numbers. It feels like there are 4 consistent, those guys are always on the field, and then they're figuring out one position. Damani Richardson, strong safety, 61 snaps. That he's the leader of your defense. He's going to be out there all the time. Bryce Anderson, nickelback, 56 snaps there. Jacoby Matthews at 44 snaps at free safety, 54 snaps at free safety. And then Deuce Harmon got 49 snaps at one of the cornerback positions. Then nobody else has over 35, right? Like Javon Thomas has 32, DeBerry has 31, Tyreek Chappelle has 26. So it feels like 4 of the 5 spots are settled. And then there's just that one spot that they're still just kind of rotating and seeing if a guy will really figure it out and step up there.
Yeah. And it's that corner spot. And it was a worry going into the season, I think. I think it was always something that we were concerned about. And I'm not saying corner is an easy position to play, because it is most certainly not.
I think it's the hardest position to play.
I would support that argument. Obviously, I have some defensive line bias, and then there's some things with read option that I'd say are pretty difficult. But I think, like, with the corner, the amount of field you have to see, as well as you're not going to be man coverage every time. Sometimes you're going to be in zone, but you're still kind of out there on an island. And it's a very tough place to be. And obviously A&M has had some struggles at the corner position this year, and there's been times where teams have beat them deep. And South Carolina has some receivers that are capable of creating issues. I mean, Nick Harbor I still think is pretty impressive. Leggett was limited to 3 catches for 20 yards, and I think that was a big part of A&M's successes. I think they placed an emphasis on covering him and limiting his opportunities, because the ball wasn't thrown his way a lot either. But yeah, I mean, we talked about improvement and needing to see improvement after that Miami game in particular. And I think this unit has improved. Obviously, like there's still going to be some lapses in coverage, but you're not seeing the big mistakes that I think we saw, last week or 2 weeks ago against Tennessee, and this week against South Carolina. It's been really pretty solid secondary performances. Obviously the Alabama game was a little bit rough, but I just feel like this unit's improving, and that's a good sign of what's going to happen in the future. And obviously, like the better the coverage gets, the more sacks that A&M's going to have as well, because the quarterbacks can't get rid of the ball, and it's just going to be kind of a self-sustaining positive reaction, I think, is what I'm going to go with to describe it. Where the defensive line gets pressure. The secondary has coverage, and it makes each other's jobs a lot easier when those things are working in unison.
To wrap up, it feels like the game wasn't satisfying. It wasn't fun, but it was how Texas A&M is going to have to win these next few games. They ran the ball 4 times for every time they passed it 3 times, right? 40 rushes, 30 passes. Didn't turn the ball over. Got after the quarterback, stopped the run, made it ugly, won with special teams. Like that, it feels like that's how Texas A&M is going to have to beat Ole Miss. That's how Texas A&M is going to have to beat LSU, maybe even Mississippi State. And so, would you trade fun for wins, or you're just a win guy because you're a former football player? How much is the aesthetic part of the situation for you?
I mean, I definitely prefer wins to fun.
Both is nice, though.
Yeah, winning is fun, as it were.
Yeah, you're such a defensive lineman, bro.
Oh, I can't help it. I am the way I was made. But yeah, I mean, you're going to have to win ugly, especially against a team in Ole Miss that wants, and LSU too, that don't necessarily want to play that brand of football. That was the other thing too, is I think Alabama is a team that can win that way.
Yeah, take them into the mud.
Yeah, Tennessee doesn't like. That's how they've been winning games this year, though, which is weird compared to what we saw from Tennessee last year. Ole Miss and LSU is more like a neither one of those teams seems like they want to win those ugly type of games. They want to execute what they do offensively, and obviously the LSU defense is still a big question mark there. Ole Miss being the opponent, I think they're a little bit more well-rounded. That's why they won that game in Oxford. But man, I think if A&M can slow down the rushing attack, especially of Ole Miss, and I'm not saying that Ole Miss can't throw the ball, but if you take Quinshon Judkins and those guys out of it, it's I think A&M has a real shot. And obviously, like, you still have Edgerrin Cooper, who is just an incredible player. I don't think we talked enough about him. I mean, that play on the screen, but then also the forced fumble at the end of the game to kind of seal it. Like, the dude is just everywhere. Like, it's been crazy to see how successful he's been this year. And I want to make sure that we give him enough credit too, just because he's been as vital as that defensive line, living up to their expectations. He's exceeded his own.
You remember when we were young and naive in the summer and thought that the linebacker position was the major question mark for the Texas A&M Aggies, and if they could only just figure out that pesky little linebacker situation, they'd be okay. And Edgerrin Cooper is grading out at 93.6 for his efforts on Saturday. And then Torian York, maybe the best freshman defensive player in the country, definitely the best defensive linebacker, true freshman in the country, just absolutely excellent again, the true freshman from Temple. And so, yeah, I mean, we could just have an Edgerrin Cooper show probably. And so that'll be the NFL draft show, I'd imagine, pretty soon. Let's get into second down. Let's talk a little bit more in depth about the upcoming game against Ole Miss Saturday at 11 a.m. That is the kickoff there in Oxford. Rebels are a 3-point favorite. A little bit surprised about that. Usually get 3 points for being home. That means this is a pick 'em elsewhere, even though the Rebels are 7-1 and ranked 11th in the nation. Their only loss so far this year is to Alabama. Rebels averaging 38.9 points per game, 4.6 yards a rush, and 16 passing touchdowns to only 5 interceptions. The defense holding opponents to 21.4 yards points per game, 3.5 yards a rush, and they've created 13 turnovers. They're opportunistic over there on that side of the ball for Ole Miss. Jay, kind of what are your thoughts overall on Ole Miss, and what worries you the most if you're game planning against this team?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if we've talked about him as much this year, but Quinshon Judkins is still one of the best players in the SEC, especially at the running back position. He's a guy that can bust open a big play anytime. And then you also have Ulysses Bentley in that backfield now, who I think is more of he's a little bit of a quicker back than Judkins. Judkins obviously has everything. He can do it all, but has more of that power aspect to his game than Bentley does. And those are the two guys. It's that rushing attack that I think that is most concerning. These guys average 4.6 yards a carry, which is pretty good rushing attack there. Jackson Dart he makes plays, but he's got a little bit of that. Sometimes he makes mistakes as well.
Yeah.
I think if A&M is to win the game in Oxford, I think putting the ball on Jackson Dart's hands is probably the best course of action. Because letting Ole Miss kind of break off big runs is going to be something that scares me a lot as a defensive game planner.
Quinshon Judkins is still rushing against Texas A&M last year. The ghost of Judkins is still gaining yards. He ran the ball 34 times for 205 yards and a touchdown. As a team, Ole Miss had 390 rushing yards in that 31-28 win over Texas A&M. So I'd imagine, I mean, you can talk about this a little bit. How much does a shit performance like that, because there's really no other way to put it, right? Like, they got punked last year by Ole Miss up front. And a lot of those same guys that went through that butt whooping last year on the Aggie front seven are back and ready to go for this one. How much does a week of getting told and watching last year's film and seeing what you did and how well you got, I mean, how much does that play into your motivation?
Oh, it's going to be a huge motivating factor, because you always want to get that one back, right? Like, if you're a competitive athlete, you don't ever want to let anybody get one up on you. So having the opportunity to go back and go into Oxford and have an opportunity to kind of get one back over on Ole Miss, and shut down that rushing attack would be a big motivating factor. And you can bet they're going to talk about it through practice all week. It's going to be something that, I mean, it's bulletin board material. And sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't, right? Like sometimes, you get out there and all of a sudden they break a couple big runs and you're like, oh, here we go again.
Yeah.
But on the flip side of it, like having that chip on your shoulder going in, it's a good motivating factor, and it can make a big difference as far as bringing out the best in you. And I think that this A&M front seven in particular is going to rise to the challenge on this one.
Ole Miss is, I mean, you take away the LSU game where they scored 55 points, which is absolutely insane that LSU is giving up 55 points in regulation to anybody. They scored 20 or 10 against Alabama, 27 against a decent Arkansas team. I mean, not even a decent Arkansas team, but a team that has a defense with some athletes. 28 against a crap Auburn team. Like they're not blowing people out. Like this isn't like your older brother's Lane Kiffin offense where they're throwing for 400 yards and 4 touchdowns and it can beat you with the big plays. It feels crazy to say this, but this feels more like an Alabama or like what we saw from Tennessee this year, where it pretty much works in Texas A&M's favor. Like their strength, the Aggies' strength defensively matches up with what Ole Miss is trying to do. And to me, that means that this is going to come down to if the Aggie offense can get to that 30-point range and score enough points. Because this defense feels like one we can count on week in, week out to know what they're going to do. And they're not going to They're not going to give up 55. This is going to be closer to Alabama Ole Miss than LSU Ole Miss. Can the Aggie offense score enough points to win that type of game?
Yeah, and that's the big question. Obviously on the road, it's going to present its own set of challenges. I think.
Oh, we'll talk about that in a second.
Yeah. Okay. Well, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, offensively, like I just,
what do you do? How do you, what is your game plan right now as the OC of the Texas A&M Aggies with this? Like, you have enough data to know what you do well at this point. Like, how do you go into this game?
I mean, look, I don't have a lot of faith in my offense, so I try to minimize mistakes and get the ball in space to Anaya Smith and Evan Stewart and let those guys get to work. Try to come up with a red zone game plan that minimizes the work done by Max Johnson. I want to, hell, maybe you try to score without getting into the red zone, right?
Do it early.
You get those big plays from like 40 yards out where Anaya Smith has space to kind of cut back and create space there. Honestly, like Ole Miss's defense has a lot of speed. I may try to condense the field a little bit and go with more of an inside run attack, especially like you said, the success that A&M had running between right guard and center. Maybe that's the spot you hit, right? Yeah. Like, if there is going to be a chance for A&M to take care of it, like I still think that this offensive line running a gap scheme where they're leaning on the defensive line more and having a chance to kind of wear those guys out, I think that may be more beneficial. So you do that and try to get some runs on behind Layden Robinson, who seems to have been the most successful as far as run blocking offensive lineman. And then you dial up a play action where you get either Evan Stewart or Anaya Smith deep. Would be my game plan. But again, with the struggles in protecting the passer, who knows if that's going to work out or not.
Yeah, I mean, I think with that wide receiver core, you always want to be able to get deep and to use the play action and use their athleticism to get over the top. Max Johnson was 1 of 3 on passes 20 yards or more down the field against South Carolina. 3 of 8, 10 or more down the field. So 4 of 11, 10 or more yards down the field. He had 26 attempts, 10 yards or less. So like Petrino knows. Like the vertical shot just isn't there. I think sometimes when we talk about, not you and I, but I just feel like when I get into conversations about Max Johnson's versus Connor Wegman, I'm probably guilty of this as well. We start talking about like the potential of Connor Wegman versus the reality of Max Johnson rather than what we saw out of Connor Wegman versus what we've seen out of Max Johnson. It's not like Connor Wegman was an excellent deep ball thrower, but like the red zone conversation, it feels like one of the spots that the loss is felt is just the explosive play down the field. And I don't know if that's arm talent, trust, or just the ability to throw the deep ball, but it does feel like the wide receivers and the skill position units lend themselves to having those big shot plays, but they just haven't come.
And it's funny because like one of the first plays we saw out of Max Johnson whenever he comes in is that deep ball to Evan Stewart against Auburn. But I mean, again, I think that the guys, if you get them in space, like you don't have to throw the deep ball to an Smith or Evan Stewart. They're so good at the yards after catch side of things that they can make plays there.
Yeah, and just figure out a way to protect him. As I talked about in the red zone conversation, he had an 80.4 rating on PFF in a clean pocket. When he has got time to find a wide receiver, he's going to find that wide receiver. He's an accurate passer. It's when little chaos starts happening in the pocket that, I think it makes every quarterback worse, right? But he was 43.5 under pressure. And so a big drop off there. It's up to that offensive line. To your point, it's up to Petrino to dial up some short passes and to keep him in a clean pocket. You got any predictions for this one? How this one plays out? What the score is going to be? Just kind of what your gut is. Oh, no. Sorry. I apologize. I forgot to talk about the road stuff. A&M on an 8-game losing streak on the road, haven't won an SEC game on the road since 2021. It's almost been 2 years. You've played this game before. I mean, I know that these places are not easy places to go. But how much is the road truly a factor, or should be a factor, for a good football team?
I mean, the best teams are going to win, right? No matter what. But offensively, like if you're going into a hostile environment, it's definitely going to be a factor. You're going to have to change up your cadence. There are signal things that you have to change, which, I mean, depending on the pun, you may need to change those anyway. But no, I mean, it's always easier to win at home. There's more factors that you can control when you're at home. There's things with travel and being on the road and going into hostile environments that are variables that can make a difference. So I don't think there's, a piece of the puzzle there that's being overblown. I do think that road trips are hard. With that being said, you can't go completely winless on the road. And I will say that in this game, I think A&M gets a little bit of a help with the kickoff time. I do think it being an 11 a.m. kickoff can kind of temper some of the enthusiasm of the crowd a little bit. I don't know. Some of those guys in Oxford may be still drunk coming from the square, so it won't matter too much. But I do think that the 11 a.m. kickoff makes a little bit of a difference as well. But yeah, the road challenges have kind of bit A&M all season. I mean, obviously it starts with a road trip to Miami. That loss hasn't aged particularly well. In fact, I still think it's the worst loss on A&M's schedule so far. Yeah, I think Alabama and Tennessee are both solid teams. But it would be huge. And honestly, possibly job saving if Jimbo can get one road win here at the end of the season, either here in Oxford or on the road in Baton Rouge.
To me, it sounded like you said offensive execution and details matter more on the road, or at least get harder on the road. And it does feel like those are two things that have struggled under Jimbo. Yeah. And so, that's just, it's exaggerated. Like those issues that probably exist even at home are exaggerated on the road. And maybe he needs one. He's got to win at least one of the Ole Miss, LSU, and then win all of the home games to even have a chance to be back. Beating Lane Kiffin, I would imagine, would feel good for Jimbo Fisher. So I'm surprised.
The Joker thing or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, it's early in the week. So we record this on Monday. I would imagine by the time this is really out and about, there is some Lane Kiffin sound or clips of him piling on here. I wonder if he just lets sleeping dogs lie, and it's like, he sees that just one more kind of loss for A&M may be the final blow, and so he just doesn't poke the bear this time, or knowing that he could maybe deliver the death blow if he goes all in on the poking the bear all week, because he enjoys talking the most about two people. Nick Saban, which I feel like is almost in love. He kind of pokes Nick Saban the way that you would make fun of your favorite uncle. But I don't think he likes Jimbo that much, or there's something going on there that's like extends to a little bit more personal.
Weird, right?
It doesn't feel the same as the Saban stuff. That feels almost in jest. The Fisher stuff feels personal, and I don't know what it is. I'm not reporting anything here, but it doesn't feel like fun wrestling promo shoot stuff. it feels like what is it, a work? Like it's like a real.
It feels like a work.
It feels like a real thing, like a shoot, or whatever. So
it's a work versus a shoot, right? The work
yes.
is the
I think
the
work
one that's
is
just business, and
yes.
and shoot is when things get a little bit
Yeah.
personal and people. Yeah,
This
it
feels like a shoot.
Feels like a shoot. Feels like when it was tough enough WWE days where they brought in like a UFC fighter and he was going to be a professional wrestler, and Kurt Angle was out there challenging the guys to get out and wrestle with him like in the ring, shoot style, and the dude locks up a Kimura and the ref has to come in and save it. That's kind of what it feels like, where there's a little bit less of a two guys trying to do the best business possible.
And they never did that again. That was the impact.
Was that in a Brawl for All?
Yeah,
where the shoot things that
poor JBL. Let's move to third down here, which we could just make a permanent wrestling promo, probably. We'll go into some recruiting. Texas A&M lost 4-star wide receiver Draylon Miller. We have him as a 5-star at Dave Campbell's. We're really big on the Silsby wide receiver there. We actually broke that news. Greg Powers, who had his commitment live, able to break that news, opened up his commitment again. And then defensive tackle Weston Davis flipped to LSU. Both of those happened over the last week or 2 weeks. Aggies sit at 9th in the country, dropped down from 7th. They still have 20 commitments. 2 5-stars remaining in that class, wide receiver Cameron Coleman, and then athlete Terry Bussey, who is electric, by the way, and is playing at a classification that is unfair. Think of like when you're playing Madden or NCAA football and you put it at rookie level or something, like that is what Terry Bussey is playing 2A football. When he is healthy, the former Mr. Texas football is a freaking show to watch. And so I hope Timpson makes a run so he can play in a state title game. Jay, are these just kind of like this kind of stuff happens in recruiting, or is this a sign of a bigger issue? And the reason I bring this up is I was on the Texas beat when Tom Herman was fired, and it wasn't because of the on-field results. He went 7-3 in 2020. He had gone to a Sugar Bowl in 2018. He wasn't great, but it wasn't the on-field results that got him fired. It was the Quinn Ewers decommitment. It was the Brockemeyer twins going to Alabama. It was the off the field, on the recruiting trail, lack of momentum that made the eyebrows raise and the attendance go up for the presidents and the boosters. Kind of, what are your thoughts on these commitments, decommitments, and what's going on with Aggie recruiting in terms of the big picture stuff?
Yeah, so I'm not reading too much into this. The Weston Davis decommitment hurts, I think, a lot just because he's flipped to LSU in state or in conference.
Yeah,
and that one stings. But at the same time, like you look at what A&M has, still a top 10 team in the country, which is, I mean, hard to do.
Yep.
You lose Draylon Miller, who's obviously a very talented receiver, and I don't want to downplay it, but you also have a guy in Cameron Coleman who's a 5-star wide receiver.
Yeah, wide receiver is not the issue.
Yeah. I think offensive line is one area where losing a commitment hurts. But you have another guy in Blake Ivy who's on the offensive line there. And there's some other talented offensive line commits in the class. So I'm not ready to like hit the panic button on the recruiting side of things yet. Now, obviously, if you lose a few more, like if Terry Bussey commits, and there's some huge losses in state, things can head south in a hurry. But I don't think the recruiting alone, like these 2 decommitments, I don't think it's enough to start waving red flags yet.
I think it's just one of the things that happens when you become more of a national brand and start recruiting more nationally and competing for top 10, top 5 classes. You're going to recruit out of the state more. But does it feel weird? Do you think Jimbo should recruit Texas more than he does right now? 8 of the 20 commitments are from the state of Texas. He's not recruiting the way that an RC Slocum or even a Dennis Franchio, like, you know what I mean? It looks different. And maybe that Lincoln Riley got in some hot water over like the last week, because he kind of talked about how he'd like to add guys from LA, but he's looking for the right players, and he's not going to just add guys from LA in the California area just to add guys to LA in the California area. And the reason I ask is because Jimbo Fisher, when he first got into the state, kind of ruffled the feathers of the Texas High School Coaching Association by meeting with 7-on-7 trainers. He didn't go to coaching school over the summer, even though every other coach, including Steve Sarkisian, went there. The only other guy that wasn't there was Dave Aranda. That's because his dad passed away like 2 days before. So I just wonder if those relationships matter, or Jimbo's going after the big fish. And if that's not in Texas, not in Texas. He doesn't really care too much about those relationships. I don't know what the right answer is, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think to compete nationally, you have to recruit nationally.
I agree. I agree on that.
I don't think like Texas puts out a lot of incredible athletes, and you can do well for yourself recruiting only Texas athletes. But to be a national brand in this day and age, you're going to have to go out of state for some guys. I do think it's like a little bit stranger that you're not filling in with a few more Texas guys. And I think the relationships with Texas high school football coaches are important. I do think you have to stroke those egos and make sure that they're happy. Even if like you don't end up offering a guy, like you still want to maintain that relationship, right?
Yeah, just pretend.
Yeah, like you can still, be on good terms and make the effort to reach out. And it just seems like Jimbo doesn't do that necessarily. And I get it, because like I don't want to go around and talk to people. Like that's the reason I don't like sales.
Right.
It's
right.
It's not a fun thing to just kind of have those transactional relationships. But I do think you have to have some kind of connection with the high school coaches in whatever state you're in. And obviously with Texas, where there's so many different places that you can recruit. Houston, DFW, constantly putting out elite level recruits, and that doesn't even take into account East Texas or Austin or San Antonio or other places where guys may be coming from. I think it's important. I don't think it's a huge like deal breaker type thing, but I would prefer for certain to have the head coach have strong relationships with the Texas high school football coaches.
Since the 2020 class, 56 of the 98 commitments are Texans. So a little bit more than 50%. I haven't gone through and broke down Texas and that kind of stuff. And the lower on the rung, the more it's going to be Texan schools. Like, I think North Texas has like 91% Texas players. UTSA is pretty close to that. Because once you get into the 3-star range and stuff, you start filling out with local guys. It's harder for those programs to recruit nationally because of money and other things. And so I think if we went through Texas, it would be higher, but I don't think it would be astronomically higher. But it is interesting to me, his relationship with the high school coaches, just because of how this isn't Florida or California where these coaches are part-timers, man. Like it's the mafia. Like they really do kind of like, and not only in the high school recruiting, but also in the transfer portal as well. When you're trying to recruit those guys for the second time, where you can call up and go like, hey, this guy's in the portal from Wake Forest. I know he played from you. Is he a good kid? Is he accountable? Like you can re-up those relationships on the high school level when you don't have them with the kid in the portal. I just find I know Jimbo's deal, and like you, I'm not much of an extrovert. I wouldn't want to do sales either. I don't want to talk to people all day long. I get it, but it does feel like part of the job in a place like Texas is to just massage those egos. Like it feels like what Mac Brown used to do feels like the way to go about it. Like that feels like the path of least resistance. It earns you some credibility. And so when things aren't going well, I would imagine you need that. So we'll see how this unfolds going forward.
And at least like with talking to Texas high school football coaches, you're probably going to be talking about football anyway. So
right,
at least it's something you want to talk about, right? Like you're not having to. Anyways, that's getting off into a whole nother tangent that I don't want to go down right now.
Let's move into fourth down there. Get into these off Aggie topic things or topics here. I kind of said topics too much there. It was good at fourth down. Into Ask Jay. The college football playoffs are announced for the first time. The first rankings will come out on Halloween at 6 p.m. I think it's important to note that these aren't the 4 teams that the committee thinks are the 4 best overall at the end of the year. They're not trying to project and guess on if it's going to be Georgia as the top team right now. Right now, they're just trying to pick the 4 most deserving teams. So I went ahead and put my list together in that vein. But I'll ask Jay Arnold first. If you were on the college football playoff committee, who are your top 4 when it gets announced on Tuesday? And then who are your first 2 out?
All right. So my top 4, I'm going to have Michigan number 1, by the way. I think Michigan has been more dominant than Georgia so far through this year. And again, Georgia probably has a chance to step up and take that number 1 role back. But I have Michigan as my number 1. Georgia is my number 2. I have Washington as my number 3. I just think with the quality of wins that they have so far this year, it's been an impressive team. And then I have Ohio State at number 4. My first 2 out, Florida State and Oregon.
That's not bad. I like it. We have the same 6 teams, but we're not going to be in the same order. And I think it's going to lead to a broader discussion that I'm excited to have. I have Ohio State number 1. They beat Penn State. They beat Notre Dame. I can't find another team with 2 better wins than that one. I believe in the big win. I don't really care if you play 31-29 against Boston College. What do you do against the best teams? Are you still undefeated? Are you going to win your conference? Those are kind of my criteria. I got Ohio State number 1. I got number 2. I got Washington. I think the win over Oregon may be the single best win of anybody in the nation. I think Oregon is a really good football team. Washington beating them. I'll put them at number 2. Number 3, I have Florida State for reasons I just talked about. 2 really good wins. Look explosive, look a lot of fun to watch. At 4, I have Michigan. They are undeniably probably the most dominant team in the nation right now, just absolutely crushing people. And it's not the players on the team's fault that they haven't played a bunch of teams yet. If they end up beating Ohio State and Penn State, they're going to be number 1. So I don't really care where they are right now in terms of that. Number 5, I have Georgia. Their best win is what? Kentucky? Who cares? I don't understand. That's not. They will eventually be undefeated, and if they beat Alabama or LSU in the SEC championship game, they're going to get there. They're going to be in the top 4. But right now, they have not done anything to signify being in the top 4 unless you start counting their previous success. And I try not to. I try to leave that and wash that away just based on this year. If Georgia was in Washington's uniforms and they had been tested the same way, we would not have them as a number 1 or number 2 ranked team. And then number 6, I have Oregon. I think they're the best win-loss team in the nation. And that's where you get into that 6th spot is the conversation there. Do you think Air Force has a claim, or any of the G5 teams deserve to be in this conversation? And do you think I'm crazy to have Georgia outside the top 4?
I think if you're going to consider a group of 5 team, it would have to be Air Force.
They've been good.
They've been really good, and they've been, I don't know. I mean, they've been dominant, right? Like it hasn't been, obviously you have a close game against Wyoming, but Wyoming's, I think, a pretty good team. The Sam Houston State one is still a little bit weird for me, right? And maybe that was just kind of a matchup deal where Sam Houston State matched up better with Air Force and kept that game close. I would probably have Air Force higher than the 17 spot. I would probably have them, like 17 is what Air Force is in the AP poll. I would probably have them closer to that top 10 area. Especially, they're coming off of a bowl victory over a group of, and again, we don't have to consider last year, but I do think that, the momentum from beating Baylor in the bowl game last year is important to think about. I have a hard time disagreeing with anything you said about Georgia. I am probably reading into the fact that they have been what they've been for the past 2 years a little bit.
They're Georgia.
Too much.
Totally.
I'm giving them too much credit. I just think Michigan has been more dominant. And I realize they don't have any big wins, and the strength of the schedule is questionable. But I just feel like Michigan has looked like the best team to me, even though they don't have the big wins like Ohio State has, like Washington has over Oregon. One thing I will say about Georgia is I think this Missouri game could be an interesting one this weekend. So
yeah, no doubt.
There's a little bit of a question there, and I think Mizzou's, by the way, that is a very surprising team for me. I did not see that coming at all.
I think there's 2 ways to look at the rankings, and I'm not trying to sit here and say that one is better than the other. I just have one I prefer over the other. I think there's deserving versus dominant, and I prefer the deserving because it can go week to week. dominant changes all the time and it's subjective, and how do you really measure it, and who's watching every single game, and all that stuff, right? But deserving we can figure out, and we'll have enough data points by the time it matters, because it doesn't matter what the rankings is in week 9 or week 4 or week fun. This is for fun. This is entertainment. This is not a real deal. And if Georgia is undefeated with an SEC championship, they're going to be in the top 4. So it's not that big of a deal to leave them out right now. Like, it's not a crime against humanity to leave Georgia out of the first rankings. I just don't feel like they're deserving yet. And when they get wins over Mizzou and maybe even Alabama and stuff, then obviously they will be. And other teams will lose. One of Ohio State and Michigan has to lose because they're going to play each other. The Pac-12 is still probably going to eat each other alive, and we'll see what happens. Yeah, we'll see what happens there. Maybe Texas, if they revenge their loss against Oklahoma and beat Kansas State, can find their way in the top 4. But I'm a more deserving over a dominant guy, and I just wish we were allowed to move the rankings each week and have fun. It feels like they get set in stone, and then if the team doesn't lose, then you're not allowed to move them down or jump them. And I don't get why, if you beat Indiana and then I beat Notre Dame, how I can't jump you just because you were ahead. I just don't. I think it's silly. Treat it more fun. Have some good times. That's it. And I hope the committee does it. I really hope the committee comes out and doesn't have Georgia in their top 4, just to create the conversation. And it's not Georgia's fault. They had a game against Oklahoma scheduled in their non-conference, but it got canceled because Oklahoma's moving to the SEC. So I'm not saying Georgia purposely didn't schedule well or something. It was beyond their control. But still, don't rank them until they're deserved to be rankings. Give those other teams a shot. Let them build some graphics that they're going to use on their recruiting trail. And so I hope Washington is in the top 2, because I feel like they deserve to be. Yeah. Lastly, before we get going on here, you live in Houston. I grew up part of my elementary life, of kindergarten through 5th grade in Houston. I grew up an Oilers fan. It was my first love. I think one of the reasons I'm jaded in life is because I was 9 when the Oilers left, or 10 when the Oilers left. And it taught me that everything is dispensable, right? Everything, you're going to lose it all. And so the new controversy right now, for those who don't know, the Oilers left after the 1996 season. Bud Adams wanted a city to go in debt and build him a whole new stadium. Nashville agreed. They moved to Tennessee. He takes the mascot and the color scheme with him, even though they don't use it in the same way. They're the Titans. They have the color scheme, I suppose, but it's not baby blue and red. Houston decided, as they joined the Big 12, to start the year in some Love Ya Blue throwback uniforms. They were red, that baby blue and red color scheme. It was obvious what they were copying. It said Houston on the front, nothing Oiler related. Today it comes out 9 weeks later that the NFL and the Titans have asked the Cougars to not wear it anymore because of a trademark infringement. It seems like it comes down to it saying Houston on the front of the jersey. I have a question out to the AD at Houston. Obviously, he's having a busy day. If it would change anything if it said Cougars, if that would be a different thing, because it sounds like Rice isn't under the same issue here. Jay, what are your kind of thoughts on this whole saga? I'll just say first, the Adams families they're losers. They're absolute losers. They've been losers their whole lives. And I'm glad that the Cougars called their bluff and just wore the uniforms. And I hope they sell $1 billion worth of merchandise and Bud Adams' daughter gets 0. That's my take on this thing.
Look, it's just goofy.
So dumb.
It's something that obviously the city of Houston loves. You're not using it except, now you've done it because people, I think, started talking about it and started wanting, Houston to get those jerseys back. It just feels so petty and stupid. When you have all the money in the world, you don't need the Houston Oilers jerseys. It's a college, right? It's a university using it. It just seems dumb. And I guarantee you they would go after Rice if they could. They probably just, couldn't figure out the best way to go about that legally.
Yeah.
And then this is, just symptomatic of goofy things that happen when people have more money than they need. Is they do stupid things like this, and I just don't understand why they care, right? That's my thing. Why not just let the Oilers stay in Houston?
I have never understood the Adams family's disdain of Houston. the city didn't do anything to the Adams family or to the Oilers. Like, they did $90 million worth of renovations into the Astrodome. They were going to pay for probably half of that stadium if the family puts up the other half. They just didn't want to go in debt on a absolute brand new state. I mean, they ended up doing it with the Texans. But yeah, I never understood why they hate the city so much. They took their ball and they went home like the Browns did when they moved to the Ravens, but they left the color scheme and the mascot for Cleveland to pick up and carry whenever they got a new NFL team. And I don't understand how they're able to not only hijack a whole franchise, but to hijack the history of that franchise, the accomplishments of that franchise, the colors of that franchise, the mascot. Like, it just seems like you said,
the absolute gall,
such petty,
the absolute gall to wear it against the Texans on December 17th in Nashville.
Yeah.
I mean,
they're just assholes, man. There's no other way to put it. Their dad was one. He's no longer with us. Their dad was that way, and it seems like the kids have kind of picked up and carried kind of the pettiness and the disdain towards the city of Houston that I've just never understood. I've never heard it adequately explained at why they feel this way about the city that I think for the most part supported everything that they did.
And I love that, like, the letter the NFL said that the Titans used the Oilers trade dress in a manner that is likely to cause consumers to believe that the Houston Cougars are associated with the NFL or the Titans. Nobody believes that. Nobody believes that.
Nobody.
It's part of the city of Houston, and that's all there is to it.
And who do they think is buying the retro merchandise that they put out once a year?
Yeah.
Like, it's just old Oilers fans that still want to like have the baby blue. That's the national colors of Houston. Like, that is like the love you blue. It absolutely eats me alive. But that's capitalism, right? Am I right? That's what happens when it's just about the bottom dollar money and which city will
and I guess
pay you
it
billions
is
of
Houston,
dollars in tax
so.
breaks. It's just incredible. Just incredible. I hope that Houston keeps wearing the jerseys. I hope they call their bluff, and I hope the NFL takes them to court and Tillman Fertitta spends his last dime fighting with the Adams family. That's my hope here. I
think they should just make them the permanent home jerseys now. Just go ahead and do it.
Yeah. That wouldn't be a bad idea. I mean, they already are red, so you just be adding a little bit of baby blue to it, like rock and roll and lean into it. That'd be a lot of fun. All righty, Jay. That is the Week 10 preview, Week 9 review of the Aggie War Pod. Texas A&M playing on Saturday against Ole Miss. We didn't get your score prediction before we get out of here, so let's get that one in here before we go. Who wins? What's the score?
27-20 Ole Miss.
27-20 Ole Miss. You heard it here first. I agree. I mean, I think that's about right. I think, I'll ride with you on that one. About a 7-point win for Ole Miss. I'll take Ole Miss in the points. Aggies have all the talent in the world to win this football game. It's just a matter of if they can do it on the road, if they can execute, score in the red zone, all that stuff we talked about over the previous hour. We will see if they do, and we will be right back here next week to talk about it, win or lose, and preview the next game. For Jay Arnold, for Mike Craven, for Republic of Football and Dave Campbell's, we will talk to you then.